people think that fairy tales are completely made up, absolute fantasy, but that's not quite true. Let's just say I know people in the fairy tale industry, and I know people who know people, and they tell me that a lot of these stories are actually based on real things that happen to real people. In fact, the one that you're about to hear is based on an actual incident that happened a long time ago in England to a little girl that's named... Did you hear that? I said too much. You didn't hear any of this for me. I'm just here to read fairy tales to kids. Rumpelstiltskin by the Brothers Grimm. Not based on any true story at all. Once there was a miller who was poor, but who had a beautiful daughter. Now it happened that he had to go and speak to the king, and in order to make himself appear important, he said to him, "I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." And the king said to the miller, "That is an art which pleases me well. If your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her tomorrow to my palace, and I will put her to the test." And when the girl was brought to him, he took her into a room which was quite full of straw, gave her a spinning wheel and a reel, and said, "Now set to work. And if by tomorrow morning early you have not spun the straw into gold during the night, you must die." Thereupon he himself locked up the room and left her in it alone. So there sat the poor miller's daughter, and for the life of her she could not tell what to do. She had no idea how straw could be spun into gold, and she grew more and more frightened until at last she began to weep. But all at once the door opened, and in came a little man and said, "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you crying so?" "Alas," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me," said the mannikin, "if I do it for you?" "My necklace," said the girl. The little man took the necklace, seated himself in front of the wheel, and whir, 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 3 times the reel was full. And then he put another on, and whir, 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 3 times round, and the second was full too. And so it went on until the morning, when all the straw was spun, and all the reels were full of gold. By daybreak the king was already there, and when he saw the gold, he was astonished and delighted, but his heart became only more greedy. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room full of straw, which was much larger, and commanded her to spin that also in one night, if she valued her life. Oh, the girl knew not how to help herself, and was crying, when the door opened again, and the little man appeared and said, "What will you give me if I spin that straw into gold for you?" "The ring on my finger," answered the girl. The little man took the ring and again began to turn the wheel, and by morning had spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king rejoiced beyond measure at the sight, but still he had not gold enough. And he had the miller's daughter taken into a still larger room full of straw, and said, "You must spin this too in the course of this night, but if you succeed, you shall be my wife." "Even if she is a miller's daughter," thought he, "I could not find a richer wife in the whole world." And when the girl was alone, the mannikin came again for the 3rd time and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw for you this time?" "I have nothing left that I could give," answered the girl. "Then promise me, if you should become queen, to give me your first child." "Who knows whether that will ever happen," thought the miller's daughter, and not knowing how else to help herself in this strait, she promised the mannikin what he wanted, and for that he once more spun the straw into gold. And when the king came in the morning and found all as he had wished, he took her in marriage, and the pretty miller's daughter became a queen. A year after, she brought a beautiful child into the world, and she never gave a thought to the mannikin. But suddenly he came into her room and said, "Now give me what you promised." The queen was horror-struck, and offered the mannikin all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her the child. But the mannikin said, "No, something alive is dearer to me than all the treasures in the world." And then the queen began to lament and cry, so that the mannikin pitied her. "I will give you 3 days' time," said he. "If by that time you find out my name, then shall you keep your child." So the queen thought the whole night of all the names that she had ever heard, and she sent a messenger over the country to inquire far and wide for any other names that there might be. And when the mannikin came the next day, she began with Casper, Melchior, Balthazar, and said all the names she knew, one after another. But to everyone, the little man said, "That is not my name." On the second day, she had inquiries made in the neighbourhood as to the names of the people there, and she repeated to the mannequin the most uncommon and curious. Perhaps your name is Short Ribs, or Sheepshanks, or Lace Leg. But he always answered, That is not my name. On the third day, the messenger came back again and said, I have not been able to find a single new name, but as I came to a high mountain at the end of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, there I saw a little house, and before the house a fire was burning, and round about the fire quite a ridiculous little man was jumping. He hopped upon one leg and shouted, Today I bake, tomorrow brew, the next I'll have the young queen's child. Ha! Glad I am that no one knew that Rumpelstiltskin I am styled. You may imagine how glad the queen was when she heard the name, and when soon afterwards the little man came in and asked, Now, Mistress Queen, what is my name? At first she said, Is your name Conrad? No. Is your name Harry? No. Or perhaps your name is Rumpelstiltskin? The devil has told you that! The devil has told you that! Cried the little man, and in his anger he plunged his right foot so deep into the earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage pulled at his left leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in two. The end. Not based on any true story at all. None. None. Oh, hello! Did I ever tell you about the first time I was kissed? The story starts when I was a little girl. I was 8 years old and it was the very first day of school. And a boy named Jeremy Laramie declared that he was going to kiss every girl in the 3rd grade by the end of the year. 137 girls. Now, it happened that Jeremy Laramie was the handsomest boy in school with wavy hair and dreamy eyes, so no girl was going to argue with him. Except for me. I wanted my first kiss to be something special and romantic, not part of some dumb contest, so whenever Jeremy was on kiss patrol, I ran away and hid. Well, finally, it was the last day of school. Jeremy had kissed every other girl, but I remained safely unsmooched. I turned the corner to go to my last class. There was Jeremy. He looked very sad, and he said, Every girl I kissed, I only thought of you. I adore you, and I did this whole thing only for the chance to touch my lips to yours. I should have known that the things I love most about you, your strength and independence, are the things that would make you not want to kiss me like the other girls. And then he gave me a single red rose and he turned to go. Well, I melted. I called his name and he turned back and we kissed. It was lovely. And then Jeremy Laramie smiled, pumped his fist into the air and shouted, Yes! Number 137! I did it! Woo, woo, woo! And disappeared around the corner doing cartwheels. Men, what are you going to do? Well, this story is about one of the most famous kisses in the world. Sleeping Beauty by the Grimm brothers. A long time ago, there was a king and a queen who said every day, if we only had a child. But they never had one. But it happened that once, when the queen was bathing, a frog crept out of the water onto the land and said to her, Your wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year has gone by, you shall have a daughter. Oh, What the frog said came true, and the queen had a little girl who was so pretty that the king could not contain himself for joy and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kindred, friends, and acquaintances, but also the wise women, in order that they might be kind and well disposed towards the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only 12 golden plates for them to eat out of, well, one of them had to be left at home. The feast was held with all manner of splendor, and when it came to an end, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the baby. One gave virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on with everything in the world that one can wish for. When 11 of them had made their promises, suddenly the 13th came in. She wished to avenge herself for not having been invited, and without greeting or even looking at anyone, she cried with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying a word more, she turned round and left the room. They were all shocked, but the 12th, whose good wish still remained unspoken, came forward, and as she could not undo the evil sentence, but only soften it, she said, "It shall not be death, but a deep sleep of 100 years, into which the princess shall fall." The king, who would fain keep his dear child away from his fortune, gave orders that every spindle in the whole kingdom should be burnt. Meanwhile, the gifts of the wise woman were plenteously fulfilled on the young girl, for she was so beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise that everyone who saw her was bound to love her. It happened that on the very day when she was 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and the maiden was left in the palace quite alone. So she went round into all sorts of places, looking into rooms and bedchambers just as she liked, and at last came to an old tower. She climbed up the narrow winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it, the door sprang open. And there in a little room sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning her flax. "Good day, old mother," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing there?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. "What sort of thing is that rattles around so merrily?" said the girl, and she took the spindle and wanted to spin too. But scarcely had she touched the spindle when the magic decree was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. And in the very moment when she felt the prick, she fell down upon the bed that stood there and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and the queen, who had just come home and had entered the great hall, began to go to sleep, and the whole of the court with them. The horses too went to sleep in the whole courtyard, and the dogs in the yard, and the pigeons upon the roof, and the flies on the wall. Even the fire that was flaming on the hearth became quiet and slept. The roast meat left off frizzling, and the cook was just going to pull the hair of the scullery boy because he'd forgotten something, let him go, and went to sleep. And the wind fell, and on the trees before the castle not a leaf moved again. But round about the castle there began to grow a hedge of thorns, which every year became higher, and at last grew close up around the castle and all over it, so that there was nothing of it to be seen, not even the flag upon the roof. But the story of the beautiful sleeping briar rose, so the princess was named, went about the country, so that from time to time kings' sons came and tried to get through the thorny hedge into the castle. But they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as if they had hands, and the youths were caught in them and could not get loose again, and died a miserable death. After long, long years, a king's son came again to that country and heard an old man talking about the thorn hedge, and that a castle was said to stand behind it, in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose had been asleep for 100 years, and that the king and the queen and the whole court were asleep likewise. He had heard, too, from his grandfather, that many kings' sons had already come and had tried to get through the thorny hedge, but they had remained sticking fast in it and had died a pitiful death. Then the youth said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man might dissuade him as he would, he did not listen to his words. But by this time the 100 years had just passed, and the day had come when Briar Rose was to awake again. When the king's son came near to the thorn hedge, it was nothing but large and beautiful flowers, which parted from each other of their own accord and let him pass unhurt. And then they closed again behind him like a hedge. In the castle yard he saw the horses and the spotted hounds lying asleep. On the roof sat the pigeons with their heads under their wings, and when he entered the house, the flies were asleep upon the wall. The cook in the kitchen was still holding out his hand to seize the boy, and the maid was sitting by the black hand which she was going to pluck. He went on farther, and in the great hall he saw the whole of the court lying asleep, and up by the throne lay the king and the queen. Then he went on still further, and all was so quiet that a breath could be heard, and at last he came to the tower and opened the door into the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awoke and looked at him quite sweetly. And then they went down together, and the king awoke, and the queen, and the whole court, and looked at each other in great astonishment, and the horses in the courtyard stood up and shook themselves, the hounds jumped up and wagged their tails, the pigeons upon the roof pulled out their heads from under the wings, looked around, and flew into the open country. The flies on the walls crept again, the fire in the kitchen burned up and flickered and cooked the meat, and the joint began to turn and sizzle again, and the cook gave the boy such a box on the ear that he screamed, and the maid finished plucking the fowl. And then the marriage of the king's son with Briar Rose was celebrated with all splendor, and they lived contented to the end of their days. The end.